Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your latest financial news from across New Zealand and around the globe. Under the spotlight this week, the latest EU action proves yet again that when push comes to shove, they'll take action to defend the European system. On June 17th, the Greeks go back to the polls. The world is on a knife edge. And why should we care about the state of Spanish banks? All this and much, much more coming up. Joining me now to discuss the opportunities and the challenges facing global markets is economist turned director of financial focus, Murray Weatherston, and Christoph Schumacher, professor of innovation and economics at Massey University. Gentlemen, great to have you here. And let's start with those Spanish banks, the 100 billion euro bailout. Christoph, what's your take on it?
It's the usual thing. A country's in trouble, and therefore the EU is stepping in to provide help, especially if the country is as big as Spain is, the fourth largest economy in Europe.
Yeah, and yet the European Central Bank, for example, hasn't lowered the interest rates. They're putting the pressure on the politicians to basically solve the crisis. Do you think it can happen?
Honest answer, no. I don't think a 100 billion euro bailout is enough. It sounds a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But if you consider that some of the largest banks in Spain need up to 30 billion euro just in financial injections, then 100 billion euros don't go far enough.
And yet, Murray, when we look at Spain, here we have the world's 12th largest economy, the fourth largest in the Eurozone. What's your take on the Spanish bank situation?
Well, I think the banks are in trouble. They clearly need a lot more capital. There's been a big real estate boom and bust.
And that's the big problem, isn't it? Tell me more about that.
Well, I think there was a huge amount of building in Spain in the first part of the 21st century. When the global financial crisis came, demand all disappeared. I mean, you see shots on telly of buildings that are, brick buildings that haven't been plastered, they haven't got anything in them, and there just seems to be lots and lots and lots of overcapacity.
And yet, while this buys them some time, does it really buy them part of the solution? That's the big question.
No, well, time does heal eventually, but I mean, the Spanish economy is in real dire straits. Unemployment rates 25% on average, 50% for youth's unemployment. It's a real huge problem, and really this is a band-aid that they're putting on the problems to stop the banks actually going bust.
Now, Spain is the fourth country to put its hand out and take the handout. We've had Greece, Ireland, Portugal. Who's next, Christoph?
Probably Italy, if we are right. But just to pick up on that point, it's a little band-aid on a much bigger issue, and that is the real problem. If you want to be cynical, monetary union was doomed to fail from the beginning, because unless you have political union, it doesn't work to mix such different economies under one big umbrella and then hope that things work out all right.
What do you predict is going to happen on the weekend now? June 17th, the Greeks go back to the polls. What are you picking, gentlemen?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Chaos, I think, will be what will happen. I mean, everybody will be waiting to see who's the biggest party because in the vote, because they get an extra 50 seats in the parliament. But then it's going to be an issue of what the overall balance is. I mean, last time they couldn't actually make a coalition that could agree how to go forward.
That's right.
There's no guarantees that this time they'll make a coalition that agrees to go forward. And, I guess all bets are off until the polls are in. And for a long period after the polls come in, it may still be quite confusing, the situation.
One thing that worries me, talking about your native land, Germany, Angela Merkel's in a bit of trouble. The economy's not powering along the way it has been. What are your concerns there?
Germany tends to pay the bills for the rest of Europe, and if the German economy is not doing well, then we are in real trouble. But the German economy is affected as much by the whole European crisis as any other countries in the world.
How do you think she's going to go when re-election time comes around? How's she looking?
Tricky. She's a fabulous politician. She has been doing a great job, and I hope she will get the support again. And she's standing firm, for example, on the Eurobonds. The German people like that idea because German people starting to get a bit tired of paying the bills all the time, and she is the only one firm on not wanting these Eurobonds. So I think that will give her a few votes.
So we're talking about the fallout of the global financial crisis on Europe. Let's talk about New Zealand now. What are the implications for us here, and why should we really care about what happens to the Spanish banks?
If you remember what happened when Lehman Bank failed, that sent a big shockwave through the world's economy. What's happening in Spain is so much bigger than what happened there. So it will send shockwaves through the world's economies, and that will affect New Zealand.
Meantime, over in China, their growth rate now is slowing as well. I mean, this is now becoming an old story. Have you got any concerns about where the Asian markets are looking?
No, well, the thing about China is they're slowing to, say, 7 or 7.5% growth. Most countries would give their eye teeth to actually have that level of growth. I mean, New Zealand would be in clover if we could get 7.5% growth. There's lots of stories that come out of China. I mean, it has been an engine for growth for the rest of the world. I mean, the Australian economy has, mined, sucked plenty of stuff out of the ground and put on ships and sent it off to China, given a mining boom in Australia, which has kept, that part of the Australian economy going while the rest of it's, relatively weak. We have to be concerned here about what happens in Australia because they're still our biggest export market. And so, the world is actually quite interdependent. And as a result, bad news anywhere affects us.
So let's talk also a little bit about the United States. The data coming out of there recently has not been very encouraging, and yet Ben Bernanke is very slow to take any kind of action, although they got a big meeting coming up next week, and there may be more stimulus. What are you picking?
Well, you say that the news hasn't been encouraging. It hasn't been discouraging either. I mean, the American economy is sort of, bowling along at what I call stall speed, really, where you've got growth, but you haven't got growth. The big problem with monetary policy always is it's like pushing on a piece of string. You can use monetary policy to pull an economy back, but it's very hard to use monetary policy in any meaningful way to actually promote growth in an economy that just doesn't want to grow.
I'll get your views on the New Zealand economy, gentlemen, coming up. Thanks. Coming up after the break, New Zealand's primary product export revenue could decline by 20% over the next year. Are the government boffins to be believed? Prime Minister John Key is under mounting public pressure to raise New Zealand's retirement age. What's at stake? And the Reserve Bank's Governor, Alan Bollard, is about to signal his latest intentions for the official cash rate. Any surprises in store? All this and plenty more after the break. But first, answer this in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. How many New Zealand agribusiness companies make $1 billion or more in export sales every year? Stay tuned to Money Talks. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you how many New Zealand agribusiness companies make $1 billion or more in export sales every year. 20, including wine and aquaculture, dairy, red meat, poultry, kiwi fruit, honey, and seeds, among other billion-dollar baby industries. We're back now with Christoph Schumacher and Murray Weatherston, and let's talk about what's happening in the economy here at home. Latest BNZ confidence survey of businesses here, not looking good. They're not feeling that good. Is it deserved?
Possibly. I mean, when the world is in turmoil, people try to sit back and wait what's going to happen, and we see exactly this happening in the New Zealand economy. People are a bit cautious and things are slowing down a bit.
In terms of Christchurch, certainly, which is going to be the big driver for our economy, everybody seems to agree. Again, this week, more aftershocks. Everything is delayed. How long can this go on before all of us at home start to really feel the effects?
I think we're starting to feel the effects already, and the longer this will go on, the more drastic the effect will be. We are all waiting for the rebuild of Christchurch to happen because this is the injection into the economy, the stimulus that we are all waiting for. But, well, we have to see what's happening on that issue.
The New Zealand dollar's had a bit of a resurgence in the past week. Are you picking it's going to hit 80 soon?
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, my forecast is always that the dollar is either going to go up, go down, or stay the same. And it's extremely difficult to pick where currencies go. If there was big bad news out of Europe, then I think the currency will go down. If the news is better out of Europe, then maybe the currency will go up a bit more. You've got to remember, it's not so long ago that it was sort of like 83 cents US, and maybe less than a year ago it got to 88 cents.
I know, unbelievable.
US. And so there actually has been a big swing. But clearly it's a risk on, risk off trade sort of thing that drives our dollar.
And sitting way over across the world, of course, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has come out with a report, its annual report on New Zealand, predicting a very modest recovery for us here at home. Any surprises there?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the key thing about all the forecasts that are coming out is that the near-term growth is always being reduced down and the recovery is being pushed out further. I think one of the depressing things about the forecast going forward is, Christchurch, or the rebuild of Christchurch, is actually quite a strong part of the, upswing in growth that we're actually expecting. And without that, we're just sort of muddling along at 1.5%. The thing about the BNZ confidence survey, well, the headline number was quite bad. That I think it was -5% of respondents, or the difference between the respondents who said it was going to go up and the respondents who said it was going to go down was -5%. The narrative of it suggested that was still equivalent to growth of about 1.5% in the economy. So, while it's easy to take some of the headlines in these stories and think, oh, gee, that's real bad. When you get in and read the nuts and bolts,
it's not quite as bad as you think.
It's not quite as bad as it looks.
I see the IMF is picking economic growth, picking up from 1.1% last year. They're saying to 2.3% this year and 3.2% next year. That sounds a wee bit optimistic to me.
That sounds a wee bit optimistic to me too. Let's not forget that New Zealand wasn't hit as hard by the big financial crisis as we all expected, but this was mainly driven by large demand coming from China, from India, commodity prices going up. What we have seen recently is that these commodity prices are falling and therefore revenue for New Zealand is falling. But this is more, in my opinion, a readjustment rather than a real slowdown. I think New Zealand has been fortunate in the past. I think things will slow down, and I believe these forecast figures are a bit on the optimistic side.
Let me change the subject now and talk to you about retirement age. Are you putting money aside for your retirement, Christoph?
Personally, yes, but not really relying too much on the government.
Okay, and that's probably a good thing. Latest People survey, if you like, that's come out says 2/3 of New Zealanders want the retirement age to go up. John Key is sticking to his guns and saying, not in my watch. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think he's playing a political game on two levels. First, he's actually said that not on his watch will the retirement age go up. And the second thing he's pointing out is if there's a problem, it doesn't happen until 2020. And he's really saying, hey, there's time between now and then to do something about it. And so perhaps the stats work in his favour. I mean, there's some real extreme things. I think the stuff that came out from the Financial Services Council, talking about tax rates having to go up by 28%.
Yeah.
And, the cost of national super rising to 12.5% of GDP. Those numbers just seem to me to have been plucked out of the air. I'll be really looking forward to see what actually backs them up. They're also talking about the median age of the people being born now of being 100.
They're going to live to be 100, apparently.
And I mean, maybe they need these stats to come out to try to grab some headlines. But I think the numbers that they're talking about are so wide of the mark that everyone else is talking about. The cost of NZ Super is expected to go up. It's currently about 5% of GDP. It's expected to go up to about 8% of GDP when it's at its peak at 2050. That's when the baby boomers have
That's
basically
right.
all gone
Yep.
by then, and they've worked them out. That's likely to be the peak. The Financial Services Council is talking about it being 12.5%, and I think we have to be extremely sceptical when we see the savings institutions, the managed funds and all the rest of it arguing that we should be saving more. It's clear, naked self-interest of what they're arguing for.
So bottom line, you're not too worried. Let it just drift along. Not a big deal.
The numbers that I've seen don't suggest that it's a crisis deal that we have to do anything about.
Okay, what do you think, Christoph? Same?
I couldn't agree actually more. I think some of these numbers, I would like to see the analysis that went on behind the scene to come up with these numbers, and I'm not too worried about myself.
Okay, so a little political scaremongering, if you like. And I notice
Yes.
Labour would certainly like the age to go up, but they didn't do anything when they were in office for years and years.
Yeah.
Let's face it, none of the politicians want to make that hard call anyways, do they?
No.
Okay, all right. Another thing that concerns me, New Zealand's primary product export revenue could decline about 20% during the year ahead. This is according to the Ministry for Primary Industries. What's the drill down for that in the economy?
This is driven by commodity prices, global commodity prices. If they go up, New Zealand seems to be doing very well. If they go down, New Zealand tends to struggle a bit. But again, I find these numbers a bit harsh.
But you're an economist. You live on these numbers, don't you?
But there's different ways of coming up with these numbers. I mean, we still haven't even got consensus on how to calculate a GDP, really. So you can show really what you want to show.
Okay, thanks very much. Coming up after the break, future proof on the highways and byways of the economic world as our experts point out what's coming up. But first, we've talked about raising the age you can collect New Zealand Super. Our experienced vets are aging like the rest of us, and the traditional model of someone on call 24/7 is changing too, leaving us prone to more biosecurity risks, for example. So answer this in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. Of New Zealand's approximately 2,400 practicing vets, what percentage currently works in the agriculture sector? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, of New Zealand's approximately 2,400 practicing vets, what percentage works in the agriculture sector? 40%, less than half. And now it's time for future proof. And something that caught my eye, guys, was are you guys soldiers by any chance? Had any military expertise,
No.
skill set?
No.
Because apparently the Australian Army is willing to pay New Zealand soldiers a $250,000 cash bonus to go and join their ranks. This brings brain drain to a whole new level, doesn't it?
Look, I think it's all just part of a market economy, a global village, a shortage of skills somewhere, and they're prepared to pay in order to fill some gaps. I mean, it's not the low-paid, lowly skilled foot soldier that they're after. It's the skilled people that they're after, snipers and the like.
That's right. They're looking for snipers, military police, pilots, and here's a weird one, dentists. I couldn't figure that one out.
They obviously like their chocolates over there.
Yeah, well, they're in the trenches, picking people off.
But just to pick up on that note, we economists have been saying for years that for economies to work, we need free movement of labour. Hey, here's finally an example where we see the idea of free movement of labour, especially with economies that are so closely linked. And I'm not surprised. If you have a shortage of specific skilled labour, get somebody from overseas if you can't recruit the people inland. And money talks, right? So
money does talk, absolutely.
It's all about incentives. Provide people the right incentives, and then you will get your skilled labour.
Overall,
That's
on a
what's
scale
happening.
of 1 to 10, 1 being horrible, 10 being fantastic, how do you think we're handling our labour pools here in New Zealand compared to other developed countries?
I would rate it on the lower side. Maybe,
Would you? Oh, he is so rude, isn't he?
Maybe
He's right.
Maybe I'll give it a 3.
You'd give it a 3. How come? Tell me.
Because New Zealand hasn't been very good in keeping its high-skilled labour in the country. I mean, that idea of a brain drain has its backing. And that is simply because people spend a lot of money on getting their education here, getting their skills level up, end up with mortgages, student loans and so on, but New Zealand doesn't pay the wages that these people may deserve. In fact, if you look at the comparison between income and living expenses, especially in cities like Auckland, we're not doing very well. It's far more attractive to go overseas, earn the bigger dollars, and then come back at a later stage.
But we're never going to be able to beat that, are we? So are we always going to have this monkey on our back?
That's right. I mean, the term I heard was Northwest Drift. It's like the kids out of Gisborne head to Hamilton and Auckland. The kids in New Zealand head to Australia. The kids from Australia head, up into Asia. Everybody heads off to Europe, for the bigger, brighter. I mean, we actually have to accept that New Zealand is actually a small country, really at the end of the world, and that there's always going to be an attraction for people to head off into some larger economies where there's bigger opportunities.
Yeah, and apparently another study that's come out this week, the smallest towns in New Zealand are being hardest hit by the exodus to Australia, for example. Whangarei, Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, Wellington and Christchurch make up 60% of everybody leaving for Australia.
This is what's happening in the sports world. The smaller soccer clubs or smaller sports clubs lose their good players to the big teams. That's why the smaller teams foster their youngsters and then they leave and play for Chelsea, Man United, Bayern München and have you not. So we just see in the big world what's happening in the sports world all over for years.
So are we filling our young people with a dream that is not able to really be realized? Do we have to be more realistic and say we can box above our weight occasionally with a few exceptions, but overall we're always going to be a small fish and we're always going to struggle economically?
And there's nothing wrong with actually that. I think New Zealand could do a bit better in providing some more incentives for the youngs to stay, giving more chances for start-up to break down on that sort of boys network where it's very hard to get into good positions. Here in New Zealand, you often hear you need so and so many years of work experience to get this. Education is not seen as high a signal as it is in other parts of the world. People here tend to prefer somebody with work experience rather than a master's degree or PhD. So that's not the right incentive for young people. You want to know that if I put the education, if I put the skills level in, I'll get a job, and I might not get this in New Zealand, so I go overseas. But the fact is that New Zealand is a small economy. We'll always be struggling to keep our brightest who have opportunities elsewhere to make a lot more money and then come back later on when New Zealand is a fantastic place to raise kids and retire. But when you're young and you want to play with the big boys, we'll always miss out.
I said before, we're really at the end of the world. We don't have just things like entertainment. We get the odd show that comes through, maybe to Auckland, Wellington, maybe Christchurch, well, less so after the earthquake. If you go to London, New York, and you go to a show, effectively a different show every day of the week. It's much bigger, there's much more to see, there's a draw for people to go over there. The wages are actually higher, especially measured in New Zealand dollar terms. And lots of our best and brightest actually will always end up overseas. It's just, unfortunately, a fact of life.
Or they'll be at Mystery Creek at National Field Days, the best and the brightest, checking out. This is something that pumps $650 million into the economy every year. They're expecting 150,000 visitors this year. How important is National Field Days, do you think, in gauging farmer confidence in critical parts of our economy?
Very important, especially to get all these people together in one place. The whole idea of networking is very important to see what's going on. And let's not forget, New Zealand is actually doing a very, very fine job in that area of business. So it's important to have a focal point and to bring all these people together for exchange of ideas. Just the excitement, the enthusiasm that comes with those things, I think is good.
300 international visitors this year will be at the show, and they're going to be wined and dined. Just a smart economic move, do you think, Murray?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just like at the bloodstock sales. They bring in the overseas buyers and they wine and dine the overseas buyers. You've got to make people feel good about the place in order to get them to want to deal with you.
When are you going to wine and dine me? I'm still waiting, Murray. How many times have you been on this show? We'll talk about that. Now, listen, I know that you're off to Europe shortly. Where are you going to go and what are you going to be looking for?
I'm going to go to Germany, probably Brussels as well, and then to France, to Strasbourg. It's just getting in touch with, again, what's happening right over there, to be at the center of this economic crisis. I mean, economics has never been as exciting as it is currently, and I never thought I would use the word excitement and economics in one sentence.
Me neither.
But at the moment, it certainly is the case, and it's been great being in Germany. Being German, I like to hear from the people you and to see there's far more exposure on these topics on a daily basis. There's more discussions. You go out with friends at night and these things are discussed. just over a beer or so. So this is where you need to be. I'll be doing some work for the government in the EU. So I'll be looking forward to leave New Zealand when it's cold and rainy here and nice and warm.
All right, and you come back and report into us. Murray and I want to know what's going on there, don't we, Murray?
We do.
Thank you very much. Thanks to my guests, Murray Weatherston and Christoph Schumacher. Be sure to check out our website at country99tv.co.nz. Meantime, our Aussie mate Richard, who you're about to meet, knows just how those Spanish banks must be feeling with that multi-billion euro bailout. Saved at the 11th hour with the crown jewels safe and sound.
Shit.
Keep the faith and keep your eyes open. And say good day if you see me at field days. I'll be there for sure. Wouldn't miss it. Check out the Country 99 TV stand as well and get yourself on TV. We're looking for new stars. Nothing personal, guys. See you next time.